Hi, my name is Camille Oster, and I am an author of contemporary and historical romance. I'm setting up this channel to read some of my books to anyone who wants to follow along. So this one is called A Pirate's Ruse, and it's set in the late 17th century, where we find our main character, Clara, in a convent, just about to turn 18. When she's learning that she has a father she didn't actually know about. So this is the first chapter. Subscribe and follow along the subsequent chapters if you want to.
Chapter 1. Liverpool, 1687. "I fear for your soul," Sister Margaret said, rearranging her habit as she rose from the bare chair behind her worn mahogany desk. They were in Sister Margaret's vaulted office, where peeling plaster created patterns on an otherwise unadorned ceiling. The iciness of the room soaked through Clara's dress. It always did, and she had been in this office more than a few times. "Perhaps if I've whipped you more." The nun genuinely sounded regretful, but Clara wasn't sure the woman could have whipped her more than she had, considering she still bore the scars of the birch switch Sister Margaret used to discipline and instill order. "It's such a shame. You're such a pretty girl, but your time here is finished." The woman waved dismissively. "Come, it is time. We have tried to do the best we could for you." Clara picked up her carry-bag and straightened her skirt, refusing to show fear in front of this woman, who had, in essence, been the most maternal force in her life, an exasperated and ashamed mother. Because try as she might, Clara did everything wrong. She never managed to be quiet when she was supposed to, or to be demure. She particularly failed at that. It wasn't like she was trying to be horrible. She just missed that part in her that could be quiet and still. Her wild dark brown curls escaped from under her mob cap as she followed Sister Margaret through the courtyard to the main doors of the convent, the massive wooden doors to the outside world where they rarely got to go. Over the last few years, Clara had longed to be free in the world, free of the convent routine and enforced silence, all in an attempt to make them proper women. Clara knew the sisters were disappointed at her in that regard. She couldn't dance, her needlework made the sisters cry, and her singing made everyone else cry. She couldn't sit still without fidgeting, and she had never truly gotten the hang of prayer. But now that was all over. Her time at the Blessed Virgin Convent and Home for Young Girls was over. Sister Margaret opened the small door cut into the larger one, standing back to let Clara through. "May God be with you," she said. But Clara suspected the sisters were glad to be rid of her. Unteachable, they had said, and admittedly she wasn't that bright when it came to words and letters. Taking a shuddering breath, Clara looked outside, clasping her hand around the silver coins the sisters had given her, and stepped through the door. "Keep to your prayers and the lessons we've tried to instill in you," Sister Margaret said before slamming the door shut. Clara was about to respond saying she would, but the door firmly closed behind her before she had a chance. She heard the bolt slide in place and then noticed the noise of the street that now assaulted her. Liverpool. She'd lived here all her life, but knew very little of the city. Clasping her bag close to her, she looked left and right down the street, finally outside the high walls of the convent where she'd grown up. Drizzling rain turned the street to muck, unpleasant odors stinging her nose. "Happy birthday to me," she said quietly to herself, having no idea what to do with herself. She had to find employment of some kind, but she had little idea how. She wasn't bright enough to teach, and she struggled to follow direction, which would likely curtail her employment with any respectable family. She suspected she would, on the whole, be better off if a convent education hadn't left her so unprepared to deal with real life. What use was knowledge of saints in a place like this? She asked herself as she stepped out of the way of a cart. The street's muck sloshed under the wheels, and Clara stepped back to prevent the foul-smelling mud from splattering on her shoes. This wasn't even a Catholic country, which made the convent education even more remote from the practical skills she needed. Miss Clara Nears, a craggy-looking man across the road asked, his voice croaky with a distinct quiver. Clara eyed the inquirer suspiciously, aware the man knew her name. A large scar went down the side of his cheek, and he definitely fit the bill of the many types of men she'd been warned to stay away from. His hair was long and stringy, a mix between gray and brown. He was waiting for an answer, but she didn't want to give him one. Nothing about him looked trustworthy, from his threadbare clothes to the crutch under his arm supporting a severe limp. But he knew her name. "Yes," she said carefully. "Your father wants a word." Clara's mouth fell open in astonishment. My father? She had never been told of a father. Throwing a piercing glance back at the convent, she swore to herself. It was just like the sisters to withhold such vital information. Typical, really. All these years she thought she was entirely alone in the world, but apparently she wasn't. She had a father, who apparently seemed to know when her birthday was. "This way," the man said, his long greasy hair shifting across his back as he walked, or hobbled to be exact. Clara considered what to do as the man awkwardly walked down the street. Her indecisiveness would lose him out of sight if she didn't do something. He was taking her to her father. How could she not go? And it wasn't like she had anywhere else to be. Her shoulders slumping, she followed the man, having a feeling this might be a bad idea. What kind of man was her father if he left her in a convent all her life, never even bothering to announce himself? As she followed the hobbling man, she ran through different scenarios in her head that would explain the situation. But the scenarios she was coming up with were ridiculous. A spy for the king, working on secret missions, hence the reason he could never see her. Ridiculous. Not only that, but he sent this man to fetch her, who didn't look far off dead. And why couldn't he come himself? She imagined a scene where a loving father waited for a long-lost but loved daughter to emerge from a convent, running into his arms and being safe. Instead, she was following a man she instinctively knew she should avoid. This couldn't be good. Walking down the narrow streets of Liverpool, along the muck, animals, and cellars, she wondered if she should run the other way. But to what? What was there for her to run to? Her hem was getting covered in filth, and a flash of fear ran through her that the sisters would have her hide for it. But she realized she'd never see the sisters again. They would never again beat her for getting dirty, or for fidgeting during prayers, or for being utterly useless at reading, although her father might. Belatedly, she held her skirts up to avoid more muck getting on its hem. But judging from the man in front of her, who was seemingly in her father's employ, cleanliness was not a prevailing priority. They emerged at the port, which was a jumble of masts, sails, and rigging as far as the eye could see. It was even noisier and more noxious smelling than Clara thought possible, and she nearly lost track of the man. What were they doing down here? Ducking around a horse, she tried to keep the man in sight, tightly holding the bag with her nightgown, spare undergarments, and Bible. The man stopped after a long walk down the docks, and he turned to see her coming up behind him. "Here we are," he said, beaming with pride. "Here we are what?" she asked, knowing she'd get quite a reprimand for being so direct if she was still in the convent. All she saw was men, ships, and cargo. She really had to get used to the idea that she wasn't going back. She was free to do as she pleased, and to face all the perils of the world, which she had been duly warned about. According to the sisters, the outside world was simply a den of iniquity. "Is my father here?" "No, you twit. We have to go see him." "I thought that was what we were doing. Is he not here?" "He's in the Caribbean." "What?" "Come, the tide is favorable. We must sail." "Sail? All the way to the Caribbean?" "That's right. Now step aboard. Mind your step. We don't want you in the water now, do we? Who knows what's lurking down there?" Clara looked over the side of the jetty, down into the black, murky water. "Never mind what's down there," she said to herself. "What's on the other side of that rickety gangplank?" She grew suspicious. This man was just some stranger who had turned up at the gate of the convent to tell her some cockamamie story about a lost father. He could just be some person waiting for a girl to be pushed out into the world. But then he'd known her name. How do I know what you're telling me is true? Suspicious little thing, aren't you? He said with a grin, showing missing teeth. I can see your father in you. And why is he not here himself if he is my father? Not too popular around these parts. Pirates never are. What? She said, thinking she didn't hear him correctly. A pirate? A pirate! That's right. Not just a pirate. The king of pirates. Clara just stared at him. If she wondered if this man was some loony out looking for a desperate and foolish girl, she was pretty sure of it now. It is your 18th birthday, Clara Nears, and it is your time to meet the man who's been paying your fees for the last 17 years. Her eyes widened. She'd always assumed she'd been there by charity, but apparently not. So if this pirate is my father, then who is my mother? The man bared his ugly blackened teeth again. Now that is a story for another day. She looked suspiciously up at the large wooden ship next to them. I'm not going on board of that. Believe me, girl, you are safer on board here than you are with them lot, he said, waving back to the port. With narrowed eyes, she glared at him. Your eyes ain't gonna kill me, girl. Now your father sent this ship clear across the Atlantic to collect you. Now you best not keep him waiting. Clara's eyes softened a bit. The idea of a long-lost father was probably the most appealing thought she could think of. And what does he want with me? He needs an heir, and he ain't got sons. Just you. Clara considered her prospects for a moment. She could well imagine the sister standing over her shoulder, shocked that she would even contemplate stepping foot on that ship. Before her was a promise of adventure and even family. Not that she was entirely sure she believed it. Behind her was starvation, then acknowledgement of what she'd have to do to survive. How could stepping on that ship be a worse option?